Welcome to Scotty Book Month. I'm Amy Lovell, a professor of astronomy at Agnes Scott College and an alumna from the class of 1990. I am here to help guide a discussion on the book Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly, a discussion that's going on throughout the country. I was really pleased when Alumni Relations approached me to introduce this book and to talk about it for Scotty Book Month. I had already read the book. I'm really glad that this book is part of the alumni discussion that we're having. I think it's a good book for women and women who've attended women's colleges to read, and I am very happy to be part of this discussion. The book really resonated with me as a Southern woman, as a scientist, as someone who was raised excited about the space race, and during the space shuttle era I was very excited to watch rocket launches, and I really feel like I could identify with the women in this book. One of the quotes from the book that illustrates this really well is, "Given the chance to throw in her lot with the astronauts, Katherine Johnson would have packed her bags immediately, even without the pressure of the space race, even without that mandate to beat the enemy. For Katherine Johnson, curiosity always bested fear." I feel like as a scientist, my curiosity is almost always stronger than my fear, and I really resonated a lot with that quote with her. The curiosity of scientists is something that unifies people regardless of their perspective. So transcending race, transcending gender, all of the people working at Langley had in mind the same mission, the same goal, to get people into space and to help airplanes fly faster and faster. And this unifying mission, this curiosity that they all had about their work, allowed them to come together in ways where their nerdiness could kind of unify them. And they talked about the newsletter that they had at Langley called the Air Scoop. And the Air Scoop would talk about things that were going on scientifically, but it would also talk about some of the social aspects of the interactions between the people who worked there. And there was one quote that I really liked a lot, was that every now and then the Air Scoop would report the happy ending for that starry-eyed couple who found true love over model tests in the free flight tunnel. The author of this book says, "I'm sensitive to the cognitive dissonance conjured by the phrase, 'Black female mathematicians at NASA.'" And one of the things that I really love about that quote is that that's what we're about at Agnes Scott. We're about cognitive dissonance and turning out women into the world who are doing things that surprise people and that people don't expect them to be doing. And this is part of our mission. This is something that, in my department in particular, we've been really trying to recruit women to do things in fields where women are underrepresented and where they can really make an impact and where their talents are really desperately needed. And one of the things that has pleased me very much is, as the college's racial demographics have gotten more diverse, we're able to recruit those desperately needed talents from all races of women and from women of all different backgrounds and all different underrepresentations, so that we can really make a difference in terms of the technology and the contributions to the technological fields of the world. Another thing that really resonated with me in this book was the message that Dorothy Vaughan took in her leadership of the West Computing Group when she became aware of the fact that they were potentially going to be replaced with computers. She needed her group to be able to program, and she had people involved in coding. She learned to code herself. They learned to work with the computers. And this is a message that still resonates with us in 2017. Having our students able to program and manipulate computers, to code, to actually take control of the computers instead of having the computers control our lives. We really want to turn out students from Agnes Scott who have those abilities and have cultivated those abilities. And we want those abilities to transcend race and gender and to make sure that the talents that are desperately needed in the fields of technology and computation these days are being tapped regardless of who they're being tapped from. One of the things I really liked about this book was the passion that you could see in the characters and how the author brought out the story of their educational path and how they got to where they were. It really illustrates that you never know which element of your education is going to matter in your future. several of these women had become teachers, and they were working in schools, and they got recruited from their teaching positions into these mathematician positions at Langley because of their talents and because of the fact that they had kept at it during their careers. So I think these characters really tell us something about the importance of education and how you just never know what's going to happen. Several of them had other careers. They did things that were not what they thought they were going to be doing. One of them went to graduate school and then was not able to get a job in the area and ended up teaching, which she enjoyed, but wasn't the thing that she really wanted to be doing. And then this opportunity came up. And it was because she kept at it. It was because she had cultivated those skills and she had taken her education really seriously. And at a time when the education was difficult enough for women, much less for minority women like this was a real testament to their stick-to-itiveness and their sheer will to just get things done. So one of the things I liked was how they talked about the career development and the family relationships and how each of these women got to be where they were, fulfilling basically a dream that they didn't even know they were going to be able to fulfill in being part of the development of aeronautical and astronautical research and really having an impact on how that works. I want to talk just a little bit about mathematics and what mathematics was to them versus what mathematics was or is to us. So all of us discussing this book, because of our Agnes Scott education, have had to take a mathematics course, some eagerly, some not so willingly, some reluctantly, but we've all studied some mathematics. And the mathematics that we studied was somewhat different because, or depending on the era at which you studied your mathematics, it might have been just the same as their experience. But these women didn't have computers, they didn't have calculators. At some point, each of us have encountered these and taken them for granted. These women would have had to have used tables, graphs, other physically printed materials, such as this large book of integrals and series that is something that they would have been ultimately familiar with. If you needed to look up an integral, if you needed to understand what was going on in your equations, you simply would have opened this book, looked for the chapter on the type of equation you were looking for, and looked it up. And they would have been completely fluidly using a large book like this on a daily basis. They also would have been familiar with using graphs in order to solve equations, because this is something that before computers, people often would graph equations and use the equations to solve. And I will show you an example of how this works. So in the calculation of orbits, you might think this was fairly simple. If you've had a course in astronomy or if you've ever studied orbits of satellites or anything like that, you understand that Kepler's laws tell us about orbits. Kepler's orbital predictions suggest that in an ordinary situation, around a point, you'll have a perfect ellipse. In reality, the Earth is not a perfect mass. The Earth is elongated at the equator. It is kind of a squished sphere. And so as a result, that's going to cause John Glenn's path as he orbits the Earth to wander away from that perfect ellipse. Katherine Johnson's job was to use mathematics to calculate the deviations from that perfect ellipse and to estimate the path that John Glenn would have been following in his flight. So a lot of the mission of the women featured in this book was helping the U.S. get people into space. There was a lot of other research going on, research on supersonic flight, research on how to get into the upper reaches of our atmosphere even before we went into space. And these are things that were driven by that scientific curiosity that we talked about, unifying the people who were participating in the research at Langley. It didn't matter if they were men or women or black or white or whatever race, they were all unified by this curiosity of what's out there and how do we reach it. And this time was really unifying because this is when the Russians launched Sputnik. And Sputnik was a big wake-up call for a lot of countries, but the US in particular. And Katherine Johnson really responded very strongly to it. The quote from the book says, "Like many other Americans, Katherine bridled at the reality of the Russians' metal moon orbiting overhead. We can't let that pass without doing something about it," she thought. And she was not unusual at all. Many Americans were really touched by this event and making sure that this was something that we weren't going to just sit by and let them do. And I think that's a lot of what pushed the US towards taking a human being to the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Because that was a way that we thought we could get there before the Russians. And this was a time when not only was there Cold War going on, but there was a lot of development going on in other countries. And there was this sort of war between democracy and communism and who was going to win. And the space race was sort of a proxy for what it was that was, who it was that was going to come out on top. And political ideology was driving some of this space exploration, and some of this was part of what made people study the science and the technology underlying all of it. And so these women in particular, and everybody who was working at Langley, the scientists, the engineers, the mathematicians, you know, everybody from the top to the bottom, were all driven by that notion that we can't let the Russians get the best of us, and that if space is out there, we want to be a player there too. Each of the women detailed in this book, in each of their stories, was a testament to the fact that they were pioneers, and they were pioneers in what they were doing. They may not have done it intentionally. They were just getting a job. They were just using their talents. They were just participating in the national effort to get people into space. But they were pioneers, and they led the way for all of the women of every race that came after them and what they did. And one of the quotes that I think illustrates this really well is about Mary Jackson and her role in bringing in other women after her. Each one of these women had cracked the hole in the wall a little wider, allowing the next talent to come through. And now that Mary Jackson had walked through, she was going to open the wall as wide as possible for the people coming behind her. This is a story, this book is a story of the time and the talents and the energies and the collective support that these women gave to each other in making this effort. And every contribution that each of them made was something that the next one could build on. A wife and mother of four, Dorothy Vaughan left her family in Farmville to take a mathematician job over 100 miles away. Working at Langley paid her twice what she earned as a teacher at a segregated school, but it meant she wouldn't see her family for weeks at a time. Would you have done the same to work in your field? Was it a worthwhile sacrifice for her? Was it a worthwhile sacrifice for her family? Mary Jackson, we learn in the book, saw relationships between women as a natural way to bridge racial differences. The West computers, the black women working in the western part of Langley, had a lot in common with their white and male counterparts. They had a love of math and science, they loved bridge, they had a dedication to their work. How did this help bridge the divides imposed on them by society? Not a morning dawned that Katherine Johnson didn't wake up eager to get to the office. The passion that she had for her job was a gift, one that few people ever experienced. Was this passion for the job the key to her overcoming the obstacles that she faced because of her gender and race? Was she simply lucky to have found the right career? Do you think many people feel this way about their work? What do you wake up eager to do? When Dorothy Vaughan was reflecting on her career, people were asking her how she managed in the desperate situations that she was sometimes in because of the race and the gender divides at in her career. And what she said was, what I could change, I changed, and what I couldn't, I endured. And ironically, the integration of the West computers with the rest of the computing section meant a demotion for her as their supervisor. Progress for the group meant a step back for her leader. Her career as a manager came to an end on the last day of the West Computing Area office. What does this say about the nature of progress? How would you have felt in her shoes?